bridge over troubled waters. I will lay me down. Just trying to set the mood, boys.
It was wonderful. It's
Just
kind
trying
of
to set the mood.
bummer mood, though, just to be clear.
What? Bridge over troubled waters? Simon and Garfunkel. Does that not bring...
The bridge is over the waters, Magby.
Oh,
So they're not in the trouble. It's not like
uniting left
a
and right.
reed being buffeted by troubled
Uniting
waters.
all of America.
Is that what it does?
All right, we are already recording. So
Oh, man.
It's
Really?
I'm going first, right?
Great.
Who wants to introduce?
Like sure.
Just go for it.
My name is Thomas Magby, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know and an uncharacteristic entry into the episode. I am joined, as always, by Mr. Graham Donaldson,
Yep.
whose beautiful baritone you got to hear earlier, and Mr. AJ Hannenberg.
That's me.
And I am so thrown off right now. I'm just, I guess we keep rolling with this. I like it. AJ, I believe today is your episode. I think we're in for another pick-me-up episode, just really cheery, just another really upbeat episode. So you want to take it away talking about Mr. Albert Camus?
I do. I am
you.
talking about Albert Camus, or Albert
Camus.
Albert Camus,
Camus.
as us Texans say, and his book The Stranger, or in French L'étranger. Right?
We're sure that's the correct pronunciation, right?
Yeah, actually, I took
Really?
French. Yeah, it's pretty
Did
close.
you actually take French?
Yeah.
Good for you, man.
It served me well in Texas.
I'm sure.
There's
been
Paris,
super useful.
Texas.
There is Paris, Texas. That is true.
And I'm sure they all speak French in Paris, Texas.
Oui.
Anyway,
That's why it's named
it's a book called The Stranger by Albert Camus. I read this in college and loved it, and read it again a couple years ago and still loved it, and I read it again today because I needed an episode, and
Here we
I
are.
still love it. It's still great. And I realized, so this is going to be a two-parter, and don't worry, we're going to get through the whole book in just this part, because I realized at the end of The Stranger that I don't fully understand Albert Camus' philosophy. And so I looked it up, and it pointed me towards an essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. And I began reading it and quickly realized that I couldn't finish it in the 2 hours I had left before we podcasted. And in any case, I think both will stand on their own as episodes. And so I'm going to kind of think of this week's as sort of setting the stage with The Stranger. I'll give it to you. We can kind of talk about it. We even have a fun reading thing planned for later where we all read together.
That's fun.
And then I told you it was fun.
That's going to be good.
And then next week, we'll sort of pull apart Mr. Camus and his philosophy and talk about absurdity, which is kind of where we are headed. And that'll be a real cheery episode, because the big question is, should we all commit suicide?
Yeah, great. Wonderful.
I kid you not, that's what the myth of Sisyphus is about, right?
Sounds great.
Yeah. So look forward to
is
some
the-
real up episodes with me.
Right.
And
Are you doing okay? Do we need to?
I'm doing great. The
Wonderful.
funny thing is, I read this because I started reading Phaedo last night by Plato, and that is Plato having discussions before he dies. And part of what he talks about is any philosophical man should be ready to die, and should not only be ready for it, but
Socrates?
welcome it and seek death.
It's about
Socrates.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is a real bummer.
Yep.
And then I picked up The Stranger today, and it's woof. I'm on a whole literature funk right now. Anyway, Albert Camus ran the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957, and this was written in, I think, 1948.
Okay.
I think this is when this book kind of 1946.
Okay.
This is when that book kind of dropped. And let's just jump right in. I have some personal comments after we're done, but I'll get there. So
you're just sharing
how
the
this
ideas
affected
first.
me in
Okay,
college.
got it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of give you the novel, and then we're going to read a section, and then we can sort of pull that section to pieces together. And then I'll have personal comments, and you guys can help try to fix me, which
What?
I'm real excited for.
Wonderful.
I mean, you guys know me. I'm not well put together. Okay. As a person. All right. So this is the story of a guy named, I know I'm going to mispronounce this name, Mersault.
Great.
It's Mersault.
Be bold. You're good.
Sault. Mersault.
Sure.
All right. So Mersault, it begins with him going to a town a little ways outside of where he lives to attend his mother's burial. And the book is particularly famous for its first few lines that kind of captures the ethos and the philosophy of our main character.
Okay.
Maman died today. Or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. And that's kind of it, right?
Yep.
He's like, I don't really know when my mom died. I got the telegram yesterday, and the funeral's tomorrow, but that doesn't mean anything. It could have been yesterday. She could have died earlier than that. I have no way of knowing. And so he gets himself together.
Maman.
And he gets on the bus, and
Mersault.
it's definitely not a story of his grief as he heads to take care of his mom. He's like, well, I must have been tired because I slept, and I found myself waking up having slept on this soldier, and he asked me if I was traveling long, and I said yes, so I wouldn't have to say anything more. And then he goes to the funeral home, and I guess this scene becomes important later. He goes with the little attendant guy to see his mother, and the casket isn't screwed down yet. And the guy's like, do you want to see your mom? And he says, no. And the guy goes, why? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, fair enough. And then the main character offers him a cigarette, and so they smoke in the room with his mom there.
Okay.
And then the guy offers him some coffee, and Mersault takes the coffee, and he drinks the coffee, and then they have the overnight vigil, and a whole bunch of old folks come in, and they all sort of sit on the opposite side of the room and look at him, and he feels like he's being judged by them. And then he's like, man, they're really old. Then he notices one lady crying, and she kind of gets on his nerves because she cries too much. And then he's like, what is that weird noise? What is that? And it turns out the old people are sort of sucking on their cheeks because they don't have any teeth. And that begins to annoy him. And then the lights annoy him. And then he's not comfortable. And that happens kind of all night. At the very end, everybody kind of goes home.
What a jerk.
The funeral happens.
Honestly, right?
Wait, you think he's a jerk?
Yeah.
How come?
Because the old people are coming paying the respects and he's annoyed.
Yeah, seriously.
It doesn't annoy you when people are sucking on their faces?
But he went
They're
to
old.
their
It's not
where
their
they
fault.
are, right? Isn't he in there?
He's not going
Yeah,
to
it's
their
his mom.
parents' funerals.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
They're going to his parents because they loved her.
Yeah.
And he's just annoyed with them.
Yep.
Because they're doing something annoying?
Yeah.
Is that what
Yeah,
you're-
they're doing
okay.
something annoying.
Okay.
And then he goes.
Not a fan.
Fair.
I think this is where we'll have a good conversation near the end. All right, so then is the funeral, and they have to walk like 45 minutes to get there, and it's just stiflingly hot, and he's in funeral clothes, and he just can't escape the heat. Then one of the nurses is like, yeah, but if you take off all your really nice clothes, you're going to get a chill in the church because you sweat too much. So there's no way out. You're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't. And then there's this guy that clearly was attached to his mom. They were inseparable.
Uh-huh.
And they used to call her his fiance, and he can't really keep up because he's kind of old and he's got a limp, and then he falls behind, and so he cuts across the country to catch him, and then he catches him for a minute, and then he falls behind again, and then he cuts across the country, and by the end he's like crying, and all the tears are like running down his wrinkles and stuff, and the main character is like, he looks hot. And then he's like, it was really hot. And at one point that guy passed out, the old fella.
Right.
But it's only, he kind of says that in passing, and he's like, mostly it was hot. And then I got back on the bus and went home. And
I hate this guy.
Yeah, right? That feels like the right takeaway.
why?
He's a jerk.
Because he has no
He doesn't
sympathy.
care about these people.
He does not care about others. He's just like describing his annoyances with like the climate.
Poor, and doesn't care about how it impacts this poor old man
That's right.
Yeah.
who was close to his mother, right?
With the milk of human kindness, and he's filled with the bitterest gall of, I don't know, mid-century French philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Life is hard. Get used to it. All right. So after that little episode with his mom and the funeral, he goes home, and he decides with his extra Sunday, right? Because the funeral was kind of on a Friday, and he's kind of tired on Saturday. But with his Sunday, he's like, you know what? I think I will go to the beach. That seems awfully nice. So he goes to the beach, and he sees there this typist that used to work at his job. Her name is Marie. Okay. And he's like, I kind of had a thing for her at the time, and I think she had one for me. And so they kind of hang out, and they start to flirt, and they're kind of like, things are kind of moving forward, and he's kind of excited, and he's like, you want to go to the movies? And she's like, sure. There's they mention a filmmaker, and I guess he's a comedic filmmaker. And he's like, sounds fine to me. And she's like, at some point, she's like, how's your weekend? He's like, oh, my mom died. And she's like, when? And he goes, yesterday. He's like, she looked shocked, but I don't know why. And then they go to the movies, and then they kind of go home, and they spend some time together. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Uh-huh. And then after that, they're kind of together. And it sort of develops what his life looks like. And his life is generally, he goes to work. He's a hard worker. He doesn't shirk his responsibilities.
Really, the whole dead mom not caring wasn't a red flag for poor old Marie?
Honestly.
Nope, she likes him all right.
Okay, great.
He seems to be pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And we are sort of introduced to his friends and neighbors. One of his neighbors is a fella named Salamano, who has this dog. And Salamano is old, and the dog is also very old. They kind of match. And they end up, how dogs kind of look like their owners? This is the epitome of that. Mm-hmm. Salamano's dog has a skin disease that makes all his hair fall out and his skin get covered with scabs.
Does Magby look like Liza?
Oh.
You're both you're very affable.
I'm not blonde enough, though, to be like my golden retriever, right?
But you're both just like overflowing with joy.
That's very kind of you to say. I'm uncomfortable, so I'm going to stop talking now. Good talk.
And the man is also old and doesn't have a whole lot of hair and has scabs on his skin. And the worst thing about these two is that they hate each other, the man and the dog. He will take the dog out to go to the bathroom, and then the dog tugs the man along, and the man's old, so he can't keep up, and so he swears at the dog and then beats it. And then the dog cowers behind him for a while, and then forgets that he was recently beaten, and then begins to pull the man again, and the man pulls the dog back, beats it, and swears at it, and then it cowers. And it's just sort of this like weird yo-yo effect all the way down the street. Sure. And he'll come back later, but that's one of his neighbors, and everyone feels kind of sad for the dog, except our main character. He's like, that's just a thing that happens. And we also meet a guy named Raymond Sintez, and Raymond Sintez is another neighbor that kind of has a sour reputation for. Everyone says, I guess he lives off women, but I think it's actually the other way around. He sort of provides for them. So he has one that's sort of a live-in mistress girl that he's kind of had a falling out with, and he meets our main character, and he says, look, man, let's hang out and be pals and be friends. And then what we're going to do is you are going to write a letter for me because I'm bad at writing letters. Now, this girl I had living with me, I paid all her expenses, just enough so that she could pay the bills and have a little bit of living money. But she always said she could never make ends meet. And then I find all kinds of extra stuff she's got, like necklaces and some other things that she's pawned. And so clearly she's got some other guy on the side. And the evidence is real thin. So he's like, so I beat her up real good and then kicked her out. Whoa. And what I want you to do is write a letter that gets her to come back so that I can spend some time with her, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then spit in her face. And then I'll send her out the door. And our main character is like, I didn't really want to make Raymond mad. So I said, okay. And I'm pretty good at writing. So I thought I'd give it a shot. So he writes the letter and Raymond sends it off. And it works. The woman comes back, and I guess the man spits in her face. Raymond spits in her face, and then she slaps him, and so he starts beating her up real good.
This won the Nobel Prize?
I said he won the Nobel Prize. I didn't say this book particularly, but from what I know, it's one of the more famous of his works. Yeah. And so the cops come, and the cop smacks Raymond around a little bit, and Marie is also there. They're sort of watching this whole scene unfold in the apartment next to theirs. And our main character just sort of watches and smokes and doesn't really say much. And Marie seems really disgusted. And when they are about to have lunch afterwards, Mersault eats all the food. And he's like, I don't know, Marie wasn't hungry. I didn't really know why.
Oh my gosh.
And after that, they're still friends. And
who? Raymond and
our main guy. He's like, oh, we spend some time together, go to the movies, hang out. It's fine. We're friends after that. And Raymond feels good because he feels like the girl got what was coming to her for cheating on him, and then they're okay. Except that this woman's brother has a bunch of friends. They call them the Arabs, right? These Arab, because she was Moorish, so they kind of hang around, and he's like, I think her brother's after me. I think. Yeah. So he's like hanging out, and he tells him, hey, you should let me know if those guys are hanging around because I think one of them's got it out for me, and it's kind of a thing. And Mersault is eventually questioned by the police.
Mersault.
Mersault? Is it Mersault?
Mersault.
You guys just told me to go for it.
I said go for it. Graham is a man of culture, I'm sure.
And I'm a Texan. It's Mersault, I think.
Good. Sure.
It's probably like Mersault.
Mersault.
Sure.
Anyway, so he's questioned by the police, and he backs up the guy's story that she was cheating on him. And didn't really check it out, so the guy gets off. And
you like this book?
I love this book.
Why do you like this book?
You will see in nary a minute. It's coming up. Okay. After that, he gets a marriage proposal from his girl.
From Marie?
Yeah.
Girl, you got to get out.
Yeah, seriously. Why is she okay with this? And Marie proposes to him? Is that what
Marie proposes to him.
Okay. Marie.
Okay, let's see.
Child.
That evening, Marie came by to see me, and all of the sentences are written very much in a who wrote Sun Also Rises, Hemingway. It's very much Hemingway, right? They're short, choppy sentences, very straightforward. There's not a lot of embellishment or evaluation of what is being said. The author doesn't tell you if things are tragic.
It's like, I felt bad. I cried. Went to bed.
Yes.
Woke up.
Yeah, very much that. So if you're wondering about the style, you're going to hear it. That evening, Marie came by to see me and asked me if I wanted to marry her. I said it didn't make any difference to me, and that we could if she wanted to. Then she wanted to know if I loved her. I answered the same way I had the last time, that it didn't mean anything, but that I probably didn't love her. So why marry me then, she said. I explained to her that it didn't really matter, and that if she wanted to, we could get married. Besides, she was the one doing the asking, and all I was saying was yes. Then she pointed out that marriage was a serious thing. I said, no. She stopped talking for a minute and looked at me without saying anything. Then she spoke. She just wanted to know if I would have accepted the same proposal from another woman with whom I was involved in the same way. I said, sure. Then she said she wondered if she loved me, and there was no way I could know about that. After another moment's silence, she mumbled that I was peculiar, that was probably why she loved me, but that one day I might hate her for the same reason. I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything to add, so she took my arm with a smile and said she wanted to marry me. I said we could do it whenever she wanted. Then I told her about my boss's proposition, and she said she'd love to see Paris. The boss wants to send him to Paris to start a new office. I told her that I lived there once, and she asked me what it was like. I said, it's dirty. Lots of pigeons and dark courtyards. Everybody's pale. And that's kind of...
Ooh, edgelord, so edgy. Ooh.
I mean, he's just being straightforward. He's not playing the game. He's not going to dress up a city if he feels that it's dirty and there are a lot of pigeons. And I've been to Paris, and there are a lot of pigeons.
Paris is beautiful.
And there's a lot of dirt.
Paris is...
I've never been. Can both be true?
I think both are true.
The city of light.
But do you see kind of how he approaches everything?
Sure do.
He's just very straightforward, and he doesn't embellish. And he's like, probably don't love you, but I don't know that it matters. We can get married if you want to.
Is straightforward the right word for that?
One thing is the
cold.
same.
I need a more negative, a word with more negative
Gelded.
connotation. Yes.
But he's being
honest,
accommodating. She wants to get married, and he's like, sure, whatever you want.
Accommodating what you want from the person you're marrying?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't know.
All right. So they both get invited to a day at one of Raymond. Remember Raymond, the punchy guy?
I remember Raymond.
So a day at one of his friends' beach bungalows, and they all decide to go. And on the way out, they see the group of Arabs still kind of hanging around the place. And they're like, let's just try to lose them on the bus. They jump on the bus, and they go to the beach. And for the first part of the whole day, it's very pleasant, right? The water's nice. They swim some. They eat a really early lunch, and everyone's pretty happy. And then they all go out for the afternoon. The boys go out on a walk because the ladies are taking a nap. And they see that the Arabs have somehow followed them. And I refer to them that way because that's how they're referred to in the book. So they figure this out. And then they have kind of a meeting. And Raymond says, I'll take my guy, the brother. If the other one gets involved, you take that guy. And he's got a gun, and they don't really want to involve that if possible. But
Who has a gun?
I think Raymond does. I think that kind of comes
they've gun on their side.
Yeah, right. They've got a gun on their side, but they're not planning on using it. And so the Arabs come up, and there's a little bit of a dust up. There's a fight, and one of the guys knocks out one of the Arab fellas, and then so Raymond gets his guy, and then the other guy gets knocked out too. So they kind of win the fist fight, right? But at the very end of it, one of the Arab guys pulls out a blade and slashes up Raymond's arm and his mouth.
Oh.
And so he's all messed up. And so they go to see one of Masson's doctor friends, and they get him patched up, and then they all come back. And it's kind of like, just ruined the feel of the day.
Sure has.
Yeah, right? Our main character's got a headache. It's kind of hot. Everybody's like, there's a lot of tension because somebody got in a knife fight and got all sliced up. And so I was like, I just got to get out of here. I can't handle this anymore. So
So he leaves his friend.
Well, him and Raymond decide to go on another walk on the beach because Raymond isn't happy, right? He's not having a good time. He just has to go get some tension out. And so he's like, I'll walk with you. You know, if you're going to take a walk, we'll just walk down the beach. And they walk down the beach, and they find the two Arab guys down there near a little spring. And they're just kind of sitting there. One of the guys is playing a flute, just 3 notes, hoo hee hoo, like that. And Raymond has a gun, and he's like, should I shoot him? And he's like, you can't shoot him unless he pulls the knife on you. If he pulls the knife on you, then you can shoot. That's what Mersault says. And he's like, fine, you hold the gun for me so I don't do anything stupid. Passes him the gun. They kind of look at each other for a while, and nothing happens. And they decide to go back to the bungalow. But everybody's kind of still tense, and our main character doesn't really want to go in and face the ladies and the worries and all that stuff. So he turns around and decides, like, it's either deal with everybody inside where everyone is tense, or deal with the heat out here, and it's really hot, so I'll just deal with the heat. So he decides to walk back. He doesn't know why, he just wants to walk, and he feels like the sun beating on the back of his head, so he feels compelled to go forward to escape the sun, even though he knows it won't help. And eventually he sees the Arab guys again. There's one guy there, and they kind of eye each other out of the corner of the eye, and he feels that he still has the gun in his pocket, and he sort of walks up, and the sun is just beating down on his head, and it's really unpleasant. And let's see if I can find the line, because it's really compelled. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt, and there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat and sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. and it was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness. And that ends part 1. So
Oh, you poor thing.
he shot a guy.
Yeah.
The guy.
And he was mostly because he was hot.
Oh,
and it
he's
was sunny.
unhappy. He's oh,
So you don't like him.
oh, poor guy, so hot and knocking on the door of unhappiness. So he just unloaded on some dude.
Okay. And the second part we can spend maybe a little less time with. I'm gonna kind of skim over pieces of it, but he's arrested, right?
Yeah.
As should happen when
Sure.
you shoot a guy 5 times at the beach. So they arrested him for murder. And he's very straightforward. He likes his investigators, and he almost he tells them everything. He's like, this is what happened, and I was really hot, and I shot the guy, and then I shot him 4 more times. And
So he admits to it. There's
it was
no
really uncomfortable.
surprise.
And yeah, I didn't like go there specifically to shoot him. I was just walking on the beach, and it was very sunny, and I was very sweaty, and he was there, and I shot him. And he thought that the investigators were very nice, and so he almost shook his hand. He's like, but then I remembered I was a murderer, so I probably shouldn't do that.
Sure.
And then he talks to the head examining magistrate, and the guy pulls out a crucifix and tries to convert him. He's like, aren't you going to say sorry for your sins? And he's like, no, I don't think so. It's like, I'm not even really sure what a sin is.
Yeah.
I think that might come later. He's like, I don't really understand what you're trying to do. And he's like, I've never seen a soul as hardened as yours. Every sinner always has some reaction to this and breaks down crying. He's like, well, I don't really believe in God. So he wants to be accommodating, though. And every time after that, it's fairly comfortable. And at the very end, whenever the magistrate sends him out, he's like, well, Mr. Antichrist, that'll be all for today. And he's like, and I really enjoyed those times when he would clap me on the shoulder and call me Mr. Antichrist and send me out. And then he sort of gets used to prison. He really doesn't like it initially, but he kind of accommodates himself. He's like, once you sort of like narrow your expectations, you can get used to any place. He's like, I think if I could have lived inside of a tree, staring upwards at the sky, I think I'd get used to it eventually, right? You can get used to anything eventually. That's what my mom used to say. And so he gets used to prison, and then we have the trial, which is some more of this ridiculous things. And the prosecution...
How's Marie doing through this whole thing?
She stops coming to see him after the trial. But initially she comes to see him and tries to smile, and she tries to take care of him. But he's like, it was really loud in there and I couldn't really hear her. And there was somebody next to me talking about a basket that they had to drop off to their kid. And she seemed nice, but I was getting kind of hot and annoyed with everybody talking around me. And at the trial, the prosecutor tries to paint him as some monster with no remorse. And he says and they bring up a ton, all of this business with his mom, right? That
him
you
not
should have
caring.
Yeah, you should have shown remorse, because he didn't show any remorse. The prosecution painted it as almost worse than the parricide that
what's
was
this
going
about
to be
his
tried
mom?
later that day. Huh?
What's this about his mom?
Remember his mom died at the beginning?
Yeah.
And he didn't have any he didn't show any feeling over that weekend.
Oh.
And so it's brought up a ton at the trial and weirdly enough, remember when I told you he smoked a cigarette?
Yes.
And took a cup of coffee?
Yes.
They make a big deal out of that. They say, and they will conclude that a stranger may offer a cup of coffee, but that beside the body of one who brought him into the world, a son should have refused it. And I wonder if that's where we get the title for our book, The Stranger.
Oh.
It's the guy that offered him the cup of coffee, and he took it in front of his mom. But they make a really big deal about this, and they're like, you are the worst kind of person that is outside of society, and you're a monster, and this is terrible, and we should kill you.
I'm sympathetic to that argument.
Oh my God.
And
But he says no.
Maybe not the kill you.
they do have their final statements, and both lawyers give some big ones, and he is condemned to having his head cut off for the good of the French people.
Really? They still guillotine back then?
Yeah, I guess. And
La France.
and he takes issue with that there's no chance. Like,
Of him getting out of it.
he's caught up in this machinery of justice for something, and he even tries to tell him, like, look, it was the sun that made me do it. It wasn't premeditated. I was really hot, and it's a thing that happened, and I didn't intend to shoot him. He was there, and I was there, and I had a gun, and boom, it happened. They made a big deal of him pausing before the next 4 shots, right? And he thinks that there should be some chance, like a 1 in 10 chance that the drugs don't work on the table, or that they'll like give you a chance to run away and maybe you can make it, but they'll probably shoot you like that. Because the way it is, you just sort of hope that the guillotine works the first time. And so you're forced into the sort of mental collaboration with your own, moral collaboration with your own execution.
Yep.
Right. And he struggles with hope. He hopes for his appeal to go through, but it's not really happening. And he just gets really depressed and only allows himself hope after he fully entertains his own coming death and kind of deals with, if I don't die now, I would have died 20 years from now. And then my feelings would be exactly the same, right? I would know it was coming, what changes that it's 20 years earlier, and then he lets himself have a little bit of hope. And so it's just sort of the story of a condemned man. And that's the story kind of all the way up to near the end. And what we are going to read together, with the permission of the audience, is the exchange of the last couple pages.
Okay.
How fun.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, so here you go.
Thank you.
So he's been sitting in jail for a few days, every night hoping that he doesn't hear the workmen working on the guillotine outside, and every morning afraid that he'll hear footsteps that are coming for him. And then who comes to visit him is a priest. And he has been refusing this priest's admittance for days, right? He has been saying, you cannot come to see me. And he refused him today too. And,
Who are you, Megby?
I'm the priest.
Oh, I'm Marceau.
Oh, I actually wanted to switch that. Can we switch them?
Oh, wait, no, what does that mean?
Because I think Donaldson can bring the frenetic effort of the priest together.
Interesting.
I originally thought you priest, Magby, because your voice is so wonderful and soothing, but the priest kind of loses it near the end, and I'm hoping that Donaldson can kind of bring that to the
Those are
fore.
your character notes. Graham, do you feel good about that?
I'm just saying that, like, I have more lines.
You have way more lines. I have like 4 words.
It's true. Okay, so the
Talent
priest,
rises to the top.
the priest comes in. He sat there for a few seconds, leaning forward, with his elbows on his knees, looking at his hands. They were slender and sinewy, and they reminded me of 2 nimble animals. He slowly rubbed one against the other. Then he sat there, leaning forward like that, for so long that for an instant, I seemed to forget he was there. But suddenly he raised his head and looked straight at me.
Why have you refused to see me?
He asked. I said that I didn't believe in God. He wanted to know if I was sure, and I said that I didn't see any reason to ask myself that question. It seemed unimportant. He then leaned back against the wall, hands flat on his thighs, almost as if it wasn't me he was talking to. He remarked that sometimes we think we're sure when in fact we're not. I didn't say anything. He looked at me and asked,
What do you think?
I said it was possible. In any case, I may not have been sure about what really did interest me, but I was absolutely sure about what didn't. And it just so happened that what he was talking about didn't interest me. He looked away and, without moving, asked me if I wasn't talking that way out of extreme despair. I explained to him that I wasn't desperate. I was just afraid, which was only natural.
Then God can help you,
He said.
Every man I have known in your position has turned to him.
I acknowledged that that was their right. It also meant that they must have had the time for it. As for me, I didn't want anybody's help, and I just didn't have the time to interest myself in what didn't interest me. At that point, he threw up his hands in annoyance, but then sat forward and smoothed out the folds of his cassock. When he had finished, he started in again, addressing me as
My friend.
If he was talking to me in this way, it wasn't because I was condemned to die, the way he saw it. We were all condemned to die. But I interrupted him by saying that it wasn't the same thing, and that besides, it wouldn't be a consolation anyway.
Certainly.
He agreed.
But if you don't die today, you'll die tomorrow or the next day, and then the same question will arise. How will you face that terrifying ordeal?
I said I would face it exactly as I was facing it now. At that, he stood up and looked me straight in the eye. It was a game I knew well. I played it a lot with Emmanuel and Celeste. They're 2 guys he knows. Celeste was a shopkeeper. And usually they were the ones who looked away. The chaplain knew the game well, too, I could tell right away. His gaze never faltered. And his voice didn't falter either when he said,
Have you no hope at all? And do you really live with the thought that when you die, and nothing remains?
Yes.
I said. Then he lowered his head and sat back down. He told me that he pitied me. He thought it was more than a man could bear. I didn't feel anything except that he was beginning to annoy me. Then I turned away and went and stood under the skylight. I leaned my shoulder against the wall. Without really following what he was saying, I heard him start asking me questions again. He was talking in an agitated, urgent voice. I could see that he was genuinely upset, so I listened more closely. He tries to mollify people as best he can. He was expressing his certainty that my appeal would be granted, but I was carrying the burden of a sin from which I had to free myself. According to him, human justice was nothing and divine justice was everything. I pointed out that it was the former that had condemned me. His response was that it hadn't washed away my sin for all that. I told him I didn't know what a sin was. All they had told me was that I was guilty. I was guilty, I was paying for it, and nothing more could be asked of me. At that point, he stood up again, and the thought occurred to me that in such a narrow cell, if he wanted to move around, he didn't have many options. He could either sit down or stand up. I was staring at the ground. He took a step toward me and stopped, as if he didn't dare come any closer. He looked at the sky through the bars.
You're wrong, my son,
He said.
More could be asked of you, and it may be asked.
And what's that?
You could be asked to see.
See what?
The priest gazed around my cell and answered in a voice that sounded very weary to me.
Every stone here sweats with suffering, I know that. I have never looked at them without a feeling of anguish. But deep in my heart, I know that the most wretched among you have seen a divine face emerge from their darkness. That is the face you are asked to see.
Oh, this perked me up a little. I said I'd been looking at the stones in these walls for months. There wasn't anything or anyone in the world I knew better. Maybe at one time, way back, I had searched for a face in them, but the face I was looking for was as bright as the sun and the flame of desire, and it belonged to Marie. I had searched for it in vain. Now it was all over. And in any case, I'd never seen anything emerge from any sweating stones. The chaplain looked at me with a kind of sadness. I now had my back flat against the wall, and light was streaming over my forehead. He muttered a few words I didn't catch and abruptly asked if he could embrace me.
No,
I said. He turned and walked over to the wall and slowly ran his hand over it.
Do you really love this earth as much as all that?
He murmured. I didn't answer. He stood there with his back to me for quite a long time. His presence was grating and oppressive. I was just about to tell him to go, to leave me alone, when all of a sudden, turning toward me, he burst out.
No, I refuse to believe you. I know that at one time or another you've wished for another life.
I said of course I had, but it didn't mean anything more than wishing to be rich, or to be able to swim faster, or to have more nicely shaped mouth. It was all the same. But he stopped me and wanted to know how I pictured this other life. Then I shouted at him.
One where I could remember this life.
And that's when I told him I'd had enough. He wanted to talk to me about God again, but I went up to him and made one last attempt to explain to him that I had only a little time left and I didn't want to waste it on God. He tried to change the subject by asking me why I was calling him Monsieur and not Father. That got me mad, and I told him he wasn't my father. He wasn't even on my side.
Yes, my son,
he said, putting his hand on my shoulder.
I am on your side. But you have no way of knowing it because your heart is blind. I shall pray for you.
Then, I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, and I insulted him and told him not to waste his prayers on me. I grabbed him by the collar of his cassock. I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart, cries of anger and cries of joy. He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? And none of his certainties was worth one hair of a woman's head. He wasn't even sure he was alive because he was living like a dead man, whereas it looked as if I was the one who'd come up empty-handed. But I was sure about me, about everything, surer than he could ever be, sure of my life and sure of the death I had waiting for me. Yes, that was all I had. But at least I had as much of a hold on it as it had on me. I had been right. I was still right. I was always right. I had lived my life one way and I could just as well have lived it another. I had done this and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this thing, but I had done another. And so it was as if I had waited all this time for this moment and for the first light of this dawn to be vindicated. Nothing mattered. And I knew why, and so did he. Throughout the whole absurd life I'd lived, a dark wind had been rising toward me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come. And as it passed, this wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time, in years no more real than the ones I was living. What did other people's deaths or a mother's love matter to me? What did his God or the lives people choose or the fate they think they elect matter to me when we're all elected by the same fate? Me and billions of people like him who also called themselves my brothers. Couldn't he see? Couldn't he see that? Everybody was privileged. There were only privileged people. The others would all be condemned one day, and he would be condemned too. What would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mom's funeral? Salamano's dog was worth just as much as his wife. The little robot woman, it's a woman he saw in a bar once, was just as guilty as the Parisian woman Masson married, or as Marie, who had wanted me to marry her. What did it matter that Raymond was as much my friend as Celeste, who was worth a lot more than him? What did it matter that Marie now offered her lips to a new Mersault? Couldn't this condemned man see, and that from somewhere deep in my future, all the shouting had me grasping for air. But they were already tearing the chaplain from my grip, and the guards were threatening me. He calmed them, though, and looked at me from a moment without saying anything. His eyes were full of tears. Then he turned and disappeared. With him gone, I was able to calm down again. I was exhausted and threw myself on the bunk. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with the stars in my face. Sounds of the countryside were drifting in. Smells of night, earth, and salt air were cooling my temples. The wondrous place of that sleeping summer flowed through me like a tide. Then in the dark hour before dawn, sirens blasted. They were announcing departures for a world that now and forever meant nothing to me. For the first time in a long time, I thought about Maman. I felt as if I understood why at the end of her life she had taken a fiancé, why she had played at beginning again. Even there in that home where lives were fading out, evening was a kind of wistful respite. So close to death, Mama must have felt free then and ready to live it all again. Nobody had the right to cry over her. And I felt ready to live it all again too. As if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope, For the first time in that night alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother, really. I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate.
Graham is not happy.
Graham has feels. All right, so that's how the book. I'm sorry I didn't tell you this, audience. That's the end of the book. That's how it ends. He is condemned to die, and he dies. And that scene,
Presumably.
Presumably,
Fair.
I mean, they're not going to describe it, but that's the story. So I want to get your guys' response first, and then we'll talk a little bit about this fella's philosophy and how that affected me personally. So what do you guys think? Graham is not having a favorable response. He's cranky.
Oh, no, it's just like juvenile.
What do you mean?
That he is like, no one has a right to cry over my mother. Human being, like, we live in the vast indifference of the world wherein, like, we are all condemned to die. So why do all, it's the same reason why we were rolling our eyes and moaning about Holden Caulfield. It's for me, it's the same ethos as Holden Caulfield. The, like, everyone's a phony. At least the only difference I guess from Holden Caulfield is, like, he doesn't think he's not a phony. Holden Caulfield thinks he's, like, not the phony and everybody else is a phony. With this one, this Mersault thinks that he's superior, just as meaningless as everything, and so what's his desire? What does he hold on to? The fact that at least he's man enough to face it.
Yep.
And everyone else isn't. Everyone's sort of hiding behind things. And it's got the veneer of romantic. He's like, everything this priest believes is not worth like the hair on a beautiful woman's head, which is like a very French thing to say.
Right.
But it's also like, okay, fine, that sounds romantic, and you read that and you're like, oh yes, that is so meaningful. And you smoke your cigarette and you think that is so profound. But like, let that philosophy play itself over a life, and you will like smother and kill any person that you love, if that's how you sort of are going to treat them, that you're going to sort of venerate them as some kind of reason for existing. Like, the fire that I had inside me burned for Marie. Like, no, that's ridiculous.
But he's really clear with himself that it's mostly physical lust. He knows it. He tells her, I probably don't love you.
Yeah.
And when she's there, he's not like, I wanted to talk to her and get to know her and pour into her. He's like, I wished I could touch her dress and feel the thinness of the material and squeeze her shoulders. Like, he wants, and even during the trial, he doesn't really make eye contact with her that many times. There's just too much going on, and it's really hot, and there are flies around, and everybody looks funny. And
yeah, that kind of like boiling things down to the like tyranny of the present moment, where everything, like, he lives a flat existence. Everything is as meaningless and meaningful as everything else. So the shooting of a man, the love of a woman, the conversations about God, and like walking around and feeling kind of gross because how hot it is of equal importance to him, and is professed with sort of equal importance. And so when it says like, he stared at me in the eye and gave me that look, and this is a game I know well, it's because everybody, yeah, of course you know that game well. Everybody you meet is going to be ticked off at you and is going to like look at you and be like, are you serious?
Right.
Are you serious saying things like that? And
which is what the court case revealed, right?
Yeah.
That his lack of reaction to his mother dying.
His lack of reaction to his mother. So, I mean, like, what? Is this guy a sociopath? Is he just...
Well, they describe him as a monster, and we're left with the question, is he?
No. Not a monster. That's not the right term. Yeah, this book, and I don't know if we'll go into more of this time.
He lacks occasion.
Sure. If this will be more part two. Existentialism is tough because there's a lot to really like about it.
Yeah, I don't know if this even gets into existentialism. It seems to be hinted at with that last little explosion of...
the gentle indifference of the world. Earlier, when it says that I had chosen to live this way and not another way, and I'm the one who made that choice, and there were consequences to it, and that's all there is to it. I mean, that's kind of that gets at the meaning is derived from your actions, not from who you're supposed to be in the first place. That's a form of existentialism. So that's what's tough about this. I really like all of that. It's the importance of actions. It's the importance of taking ownership of the consequences of those actions. But there's something to, I think, comparing Mersault to Caulfield is an apt comparison. He seems adolescent in some sense. He is. I'm going to say he's thoughtless, to which AJ would say, no, he's always aware of his feelings perfectly, to which I'd say, but he hasn't considered the importance of those feelings. Like, that's the thoughtlessness.
He doesn't have the right reactions to the scenarios, to the circumstances.
To it, but it's like it's an immature honesty. He says technically true things through the entire, what we just covered, but they aren't the full truth of what's happening.
So yeah, he's authentic.
Yes.
And so I think there's an attractiveness to someone who is actually authentic, as opposed to play acting or being, to talk about Holden Caulfield, to be phony. So he's not like hamming it up for the courtroom to try to get out of this thing. Right. So he's authentically owning what he's done, but his authenticity doesn't get him off the hook for having the wrong reactions to the events of a regular human life.
Authenticity is not sufficient as like a moral gauge, right?
Yeah.
But there is something that is...
I feel bad because we're like crapping on the book AJ liked in college.
He's going to come back and tell us.
I didn't say why I liked it.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly good. But I want to say there's something appealing to that authenticity. And that's the part that's hard about this is there's part of this that I appreciate, and I think there's an important strand being pulled on here. But overall, I would not want to trade places with Mersault, right?
I mean, who would? He's in jail and condemned to die.
But when he says at the end that he's like opened himself to this like happiness, I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again. Like he does not, what we view as a tragedy, he is not viewing as a tragedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess he would say it doesn't mean anything to trade places with someone else. But
the veneration of this kind of attitude as heroic is also something that kind of isn't bothers me. Like that this kind of emotionless indifference to the things of the world is treated as like somehow deep and profound. But really it's just not dealing with a thing of the world. So I mean, like this is I've been rewatching Mr. Robot. Did you ever watch that series?
Nope.
No?
Yes.
Did you watch it?
Pieces of it.
So I've been rewatching. I stopped in season 2. I've been rewatching bits of it. It's kind of a weird thing to be watching during the middle of a global pandemic. But the main character, like the Elliot Alderson character, is very similar to this kind of thing, where there's kind of that. Also, maybe you can get into like a Raskolnikov type of thing. Well, Raskolnikov's a little bit different, but this the sort of the veneration of the coldly indifferent to the high passions of life, and passing that off as saying that this is a profound and a authentic way of existing, I think is not true. I think is disingenuous. I think the like 15-year-old kid that reads this and is like, yes, that's the way that you can beat the feels. That's the way that you can like not get dragged down in the difficulty of life, is to rise above it with basically neutering everything in the world, right, and treating it with this indifference. That's real power. And that's real sort of ownership of self. And I don't think that's true.
What do you think, AJ?
I'm wondering if we're talking out both sides of our mouth, because so far back we had a podcast on Boethius, and doesn't Boethius say the same thing, that we're to be happy despite our circumstances? What is this other than happiness despite circumstances?
He's not happy.
He is. He said he's happy at the end.
He says he's happy.
He has been happy and he's happy again.
I would say the difference is that Boethius had something tragic happen to him, whereas Mersault shot a man. So there's a difference in the origin of the action. The punishment Mersault receives is just for his poor action. Boethius was unduly exiled and then ultimately
Not
killed.
entirely. He did prevent a plot from the Senate from reaching the ears of Theodoric the Ostrogoth, and for that reason was condemned as treasonous, even though he was just trying to prevent the deaths of an entire Senate. He, from what I understand, he did do something wrong.
Sure. It's at a different scale, I guess is what I would say, compared to literally killing a man in cold blood.
There's something noble about
blood.
Boethius'
It was really hot
action.
that day.
Yes.
Okay, so
Sure.
they both find themselves in jail, and perhaps the different thing that landed them there, like that is a different thing. But does the nobility of the action that landed them in prison change what attitude they should have in prison, and where both end in indifference to their circumstances?
Oh,
like whether or not, however they ended up there, they end up with kind of the same attitude. I can be happy anywhere.
yes.
And that's a problem?
Again, that's where I say the trouble is that there are parts of it that sound really appealing. I do think it matters. I mean, Mersault hasn't dealt with the divine part of what happens after he dies in a way that Boethius has, which is kind of the point, or a piece of what Lady Philosophy is teaching him. Yeah. And again, I think it matters why they ended up there.
Yeah, Lady Philosophy does not teach him that, like, you can take your sort of stoic view of the world because everything is ultimately meaningless and doesn't mean anything. Lady Philosophy teaches Boethius that you are still to love the good for the right reasons, whereas Mersault does not live a life trying to write. So the difference is that Boethius attempts, to live a good life, and then just the volatility of the world and the sort of the injustice of the world catches up with him. And yes, maybe he's thrown in prison because he got caught up in a political scheme, or maybe it was purely unjust. But with Mersault, he killed a man and is not guilty about it, and looks a priest in the eye and tells him that he's happy because he's shouldered the responsibility of, like, sucking meaning out of the world. And those are him and Boethius are in very different positions with that, because the cure for Mersault is that he needs to drain the world of meaning, whereas Boethius doesn't do that. He doesn't drain the world of meaning in order to, like, be happy or in order to be content. So I feel like that's the big difference, is that Boethius still posits a meaningful universe with a concept of the good that can be known, where there is a God that is good. Like him and Lady Philosophy go all through, reminding him and giving him recollection of all the things that he has learned under her tutelage, whereas the priest comes and maybe does a bad job of it, but is asking the prisoner questions about the good and questions about God, and he's like, that doesn't really interest me.
But so the point on gentle indifference that Mersault makes, then, is that not dissimilar to the Wheel of Fortune? So Boethius says there's essentially no moral significance to whether you're wealthy or you're in poverty. Right?
No, it's just that you don't get to know what it is. It's not that there is no. It's not that there's no meaning. It's that the meaning is something that human beings don't get to understand. So Fortune does it from her own, because she's been given license by God to keep the world churning.
But from what I understand, what Boethius is promoting is a decoupling of your moral well-being from your fortune. Like, you might be down in the dumps, your happiness needs to be stuck somewhere else.
Yes.
Which seems to be exactly what our main character is doing.
No, he is decoupling himself from moral well-being. He's not decoupling his moral well-being from fortune. He's decoupling his identity from any sense of moral well-being. And therein is finding his happiness, as he claims.
Okay. So here, man, it's a bummer we have so little time left. This is, I honestly thought this episode may not go the full time, but I think we're going to end up not having enough.
It is a two-parter.
It is.
It is a two-parter, but this is the part that we may not return to, and I don't know, maybe it's a little more self-revelatory. So this book appeals to me at least a little bit, and I wondered in reading it another time if this book had more of a profound influence on me than I thought, or if it was simply how thoughtsy I was as a kid. But what you said earlier, that the full truth extends further than the real, I realized, I think rather young, that something could be called, like the same action can be called surgery or murder depending on the intent behind the action. Right? If I slit you from stem to stern, I mean, I guess there's a little bit different outcome, but maybe there isn't a different outcome. Maybe you die in both cases. You bleed out. If I was trying to help you, I'm called a doctor. If I was trying to hurt you, I'm called a murderer, when the action performed upon you is the same. And so that is meaning given by human intent and by human moral evaluation, right? And so to a certain extent, like, Those things are not real. They are not, hold on, let me finish. Those things are not actual in this world, right? The actual action was a knife went into you and moved and you got separated. Some things happened in your body that are either going to be helpful to your living or unhelpful to your living. And how you feel about that is meaning that is foisted upon it by you and by the society around you. And
So
let me get there.
It's still meaning.
You're having so many feels. So I think I tend to be a very happy, peaceful person, right? Or at least I'm steady. And part of that is by decoupling my passions from things that I don't feel necessary for them to get hacked about. Like when people are offended about things, for example, I heard that some people were offended about the latest season of the Great British Bake Off.
Why?
I don't care. Like that has no purchase in my life at all. And that's something that doesn't, like, not only is it not real, it'll never be real, and it doesn't matter at all. That's something that doesn't bother me. In fact, I'm very hard to offend. I rarely get offended. In fact, the only thing that ever seems to really offend me is when my personal pride is challenged. And that's only really, not rarely because I'm so awesome no one challenges it, but because I usually, I struggle with it, but there's usually very rarely, like, if someone directly calls me stupid to my face, nobody enjoys that, and I don't enjoy that either. But other than that, like, I think I, for a long time, decoupled meaning from things. And I wonder how much this book and that attitude has influenced me. And I think only in recent years, and you guys, this is the part where you guys get to fix me, but I think the important difference here between me and Mersault and Boethius is that where I find my deep peace is that I don't see the world as meaningless necessarily. I see some of the small things meaningless in the great scheme of things. And from that, I'm taking from Ecclesiastes, right? All is grasping for the wind. All is meaningless and grasping for the wind. It's all vapor. Our lives are but a vapor and won't be here as long as the grass. And so all those little things that I could get all hacked up about and go all screwy over, it'll be over in a week. Like if it's a big problem. And when I die, it's not going to matter to anybody, at least of all me. And if I can couch that rather than in meaningless as our main character does, but in the overall redemption of the universe, right? My life might be kind of crappy, but God is sovereign.
That's a huge difference.
God is sovereign, and I'm headed for heaven. And so in the big scheme of things, in the eternal scheme, these things don't really matter, and I don't have to get my hackles up about them. I don't have to be ruffled because somebody is having a small problem that in a week's time isn't going to matter. And I try to remind my students of that. This test seems to matter to you now, but when you're 30, you literally won't remember that it happened. You won't remember this test at all. And for that reason, like, it just turns down the volume on everything. And what I'm worried is that now the volume is just low on my life, right? And Graham, you talk about the high passions, right? I don't have many. I mean, I do occasionally, but it's definitely not a constant thing. I'm more of I'm a calm and windless sea, as it were. And I'm wondering if that's a bad thing. I find myself at peace and generally happy most of the time. And that's couched in, I think, an eternal attitude. But I think functionally, it's not very different from Mersault.
But so, I mean, when I think high passions, I think it's more, my feeling on it is best captured with the idea of occasion.
Hand me a donut.
I will, yes. I think you are totally right in saying that like the test is not a really meaningful thing. And when you're 30, you won't even remember taking it. And that you can say that's one thing, but it's slightly different to say, well, your marriage day is just one day out of any other day, and right. In 30 years it won't mean anything to you anymore. And when you say that, it's like, well, no, that shouldn't be the way that we think about a marriage day, or that shouldn't be the way that we think about your son being born, or something like that. And so I think we would rightly say that the person who takes that level of indifference to those sorts of things is, and I know that you would agree, is at fault, right? Like stable sentiments, and the stable sentiments doesn't mean you're stable and you don't feel things. Stable sentiments means that you have the appropriate feeling for the appropriate occasion. If something terrible happened to a student at this school and all of their ninth grade friends were crying, you wouldn't say, when you're 45, you'll have a hard time remembering what he looked like. No, you don't. Like, that's that may be true, but you don't. That's That doesn't.
Not the
It shouldn't
time
be.
to
You
say
don't
that.
want it, and you don't want it to be true. So, there's I think like emotional health has to involve the appropriate feeling at the action, or the appropriate feeling for the context. Now, the worry is that we can't contain the appropriate feeling, and then we react big. So when you say like people getting their shorts in a wad about Great British Bake Off, yeah, that's emotionally immature. But somebody who sort of snickers at their grandfather's funeral is equally as emotionally immature, and somebody that kind of downplays the importance of their wedding day, you would also be concerned about their maturity. I don't know. I remember somebody complimented me on something, and I really downplayed it, and I was sort of like, I don't even know if I feigned offense or if I was actually offended, but I kind of downplayed it. And then a couple of days passed, and the person came back to me later and said, like, I like when someone compliments you on something that they actually thought was good, you need to don't just like say it was nothing, say thank you for it and recognize the occasion, and also the sort of the vulnerability that it takes for the person on the other side to come and, say something. So maybe I think that's the other thing that sort of is bothering me about this main character, is that he doesn't realize that everybody else has the same, that he doesn't realize that other people are people too. Like, there's a complete sort of, he's so confused when Marie is sad when he says that he would probably marry anybody else who asked him to marry her. He's like, well, she didn't want to eat her dinner. I wonder why. Well, it's like, that's a problem. And Boethius doesn't have that problem. And that seems to be that's a difference between the two of them.
All right. So as a last, Thomas, do you have any?
No, that was great.
Okay. So as a last thing, and as a preview for my next episode, I'm going to talk about the death of my grandpa. I know a heavy way to end this. I didn't cry that day. And what happened is I went over to his house, and he had died while taking a nap on the couch. And they had him on the floor, and he was covered with a yellow sheet with tubes sticking out of, where his head would be. And there was to add to the strange symbolism of the day, there was a National Geographic that said "the deep freeze" sitting on his coffee table. And then my grandma had lost her mind a little. She had dementia, and she was confused about why everyone was there, and she thought we should take advantage of the time and everyone take a Christmas picture together. So she kept on trying to get everyone together for a Christmas picture. Eventually, she saw her husband on the floor and said, "Is that Art, my grandpa?" And we're like, "Yeah." And then she goes, "Get him out of here." I guess she didn't want to see the body. And then to mirror her, there was a can of mixed nuts on the table. So to, again, add to the strange symbolism of the day. And as the two undertakers came up to the door, I saw them through the window, and they were laughing and joking and punching each other in the arm and having a really good time. And then they rang the doorbell, and when I opened it, they were straight-faced. Like, I'm very sorry. For them, it was another day. And I suppose for me, it didn't come as a shock. My grandfather was over 80 years old. I knew it was coming eventually. And my grandma had been crazy for a long time. And so when it finally came, I didn't feel surprised. I didn't feel shocked. And as an English teacher, I guess I think about death a lot. And so death at the end of a human life doesn't come as a shock to me. And I love my grandpa, but I also knew that he was headed for heaven. And so there's this strange absurdity to life. Nothing was the way I expected it. The sheet was yellow and plastic, not white like a sheet you see in the movies. And my grandma was trying to get us all to take Christmas pictures, and it was just the strangest day I've had in a long time. And that absurdity, the weird, I want to say meaninglessness, but I told you about the symbolism. The weirdness of life is what Camus comments upon in this book and in The Myth of Sisyphus, which we'll get to next week. What do we do in front of this strange absurdity of life? How do we deal with that? And the question for him is whether we should all sort of end it. If life is so goofy and weird and strange and meaningless, why live it at all if we're just going to end at the end anyway, right? Especially if there's suffering in the mix, why not just opt out? And so that's his question for The Myth of Sisyphus to be taken next week.
Yeah, I look forward to the conversation. I got thoughts.
Life is weird, and I hope you have thoughts. If you have specific things you want to say to me or say about this book, you can send them in to theguys@classicalstuff.net, I guess.
Yep. Do you want to keep this conversation going in the in between episode also?
If you guys want.
Sure. Okay. So we'll keep talking about this in our in between episodes, which we post on Patreon for supporters there. You can find that at patreon.com/.
There's so many wonderful nuggets in there. Oh my word.
There's a lot of, yeah.
I sing a lot.
That is,
There's a lot to talk about Bitcoin.
I think you opened this episode with singing. So
I didn't realize I did.
Well, I feel like anytime
How
the
absurd.
microphone is in your okay. You AJ just said this. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. You can find us on Twitter at classicalstuff, CLSSCAL stuff. And I think those are our places. Or classicalstuff.net if you want to check out our website. We're also on YouTube. You can search Classical Stuff there. Our list is getting very long of places to find us. I think that is everything. So
cool.
for Graham, AJ, and Thomas, we are signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. It's me. I got to press pause.
You're at the button.
Wait for it.